5 men surrounded him in the hotel lobby, their eyes cold, their intentions unknown. Then, in the shadows, one woman saw everything, and her silence would be the only thing that stood between them and the billionaire's life. The lobby of the Royal Lux Hotel gleamed like something out of a dream. Gold chandeliers hung overhead, bathing the marble floors in warm, opulent light. Guests passed through the tall glass doors, their laughter and conversation ringing like pearls on a string. But beneath the surface, there was a coldness to the place. Sarah stood at the edge of the lobby, hands folded neatly in front of her apron, watching as people moved around her. She had seen this every day for the past 2 years, the expensive suits, the flawless smiles, the way the rich and the powerful moved through the world as if they owned it. But Sarah didn't mind the distance. She was used to it, used to the fact that she didn't belong to this world. She was a maid, after all. She cleaned the bathrooms, polished the floors, served drinks at the bar, but no one noticed her, and no one had to dot it. Wasn't her job to be noticed. Jacob Reynolds, the billionaire CEO of a technology empire, was no different from the others. He entered the lobby with the same air of self-assurance, dressed in a sharp suit that cost more than most people's yearly income. His brown hair was perfectly combed, his smile as rehearsed as his handshake. Tonight was no exception. He had just wrapped up a business conference, and he was on his way to a private event at the hotel. Everything was planned. Everything was in control. But as he walked through the lobby, something felt off. His eyes flicked toward the corner where a group of 5 men stood. Their presence a little too deliberate, their stares a little too cold. They were standing in front of the bar, but they weren't ordering drinks. Instead, they were watching him. For a moment, he felt like a fly caught in the web. He smiled politely at a passing guest, trying to shake the unease that began to crawl down his spine. Sarah noticed it too. The way the men's eyes followed Jacob's every move. The way their posture wasn't quite right. Like they were waiting for something. Her hands tightened around the cleaning rag in her pocket, her mind instinctively scanning the room for exits, threats, anything that might explain the tension. The 5 men were dressed in dark suits, their ties tight, their shoes polished to a shine. Their faces were sharp, with a hardness to them that made them seem out of place in a hotel meant for the elite. One of them, the largest, with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward just as Jacob reached the bar. Mr. Reynolds, the man said, his voice low but firm. We need to talk. Jacob turned, his brow furrowing. I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met. The man didn't smile. We haven't, but we know you. Sarah, who was cleaning near the entrance, felt a prickle of awareness. The hair on the back of her neck stood up as the tension in the room thickened. She couldn't explain it, but she knew something wasn't right. Jacob, still polite, tried to step around them. I'm not interested in any unsolicited meetings right now. I've got a dinner to attend. The scarred man stepped into his path, blocking him. You're not going anywhere, Mr. Reynolds. Not until we have a conversation. The 5 men moved. Slowly closing in, Sarah's breath caught. Her instincts kicked in, the kind of instincts she had learned as a child. The kind of instincts that told her when a situation had gone past uncomfortable and into dangerous. Without thinking, she started moving. She didn't know why, but she stepped closer, quietly pushing through the crowd. Her eyes stayed on the men, on Jacob, on the tension thickening the air around them. She knew she had to act, but not in the way most people would. Sarah wasn't going to run for help. She wasn't going to call security. She was going to handle it her way. Jacob, meanwhile, was starting to feel the weight of the situation. These weren't just any men. Their eyes were cold, their body language threatening. He wasn't used to this kind of confrontation. As a businessman, he had faced competitors, threats, and backroom deals, but this was different. The scarred man leaned in. You think you're untouchable, don't you? A billionaire with everything at your fingertips. Jacob's jaw tightened. I don't know who you are or what you want, but I'm not afraid of you. The man chuckled darkly. You should be. At that moment, Sarah moved into position. She glanced quickly at the hotel's back hallway, and narrow space that led to the service elevator. It was narrow, unseen, and used by staff only. She stepped forward, slipping through a gap in the crowd, moving closer to the group without drawing attention. The tension around Jacob had escalated, the 5 men closing in, blocking his escape. Sarah, however, had learned long ago how to stay unnoticed, and then she moved, with a precision and speed that would have been impossible for anyone else to achieve without being seen. Sarah darted into the men's peripheral vision. The largest of the group turned just as she approached him. He reached out to grab her arm, but Sarah was ready. Without hesitation, she twisted her body, using his momentum against him, and elbowed him in the ribs. The impact was quick, sharp and unexpected. Before the man could react, Sarah grabbed a nearby serving tray from a passing waiter and used it to knock another of the men off balance. For a split second, the entire room seemed to freeze. Then, everything erupted into movement. Sarah's heart raced as she slid through the chaos, maneuvering her body with a series of trained steps she had learned years ago. Jacob's eyes widened. The scene unfolding before him wasn't just surprising, it was unimaginable. The woman who had been cleaning tables, who no one ever noticed, had just taken down 2 of his would-be captors without breaking a sweat. And in that moment, Sarah became something else entirely, not just a maid, not just a bystander, she was the person who saved his life. The atmosphere in the lobby had shifted. It was no longer just a well-dressed gathering of the city's elite. It had become a stage, and the actors had grown restless. Jacob Reynolds stood at the bar, trying to shake off the sense of unease creeping up his spine. He had been in high-stakes meetings, in rooms full of powerful people who spoke in billions, but tonight felt different. The way the men at the bar stared at him, it wasn't casual, it was calculating, predatory. He turned to the bartender, offering a forced smile. "Whiskey, please." "Neat." The bartender nodded and poured, his eyes flicking nervously to the group of men still hovering nearby. Jacob could feel the tension thickening around him, but he dismissed it. He had his drink, his night, his plans. He sipped slowly, trying to push the nagging feeling from his mind. But, as he set the glass down, the largest man in the group, the one with a scar running down his cheek, made his move. Without warning, the man stepped forward and blocked his path. "Mr. Reynolds," the man said, his voice low but sharp. "We need to talk." Jacob's eyes flickered briefly to the rest of the group. The other 4 men, all well-dressed and impeccably groomed, were now surrounding him. Their faces were impassive, unreadable. Jacob's pulse quickened. There was something about the way they moved that made him feel like a mouse trapped in a maze. They weren't just strangers. They were too coordinated, too confident. "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in any unsolicited meetings right now," Jacob said. Trying to step around the group, the scarred man stepped into his path again. A hand on his shoulder, not harsh but firm. "I think you'll want to hear what we have to say." Jacob felt his breath hitch. There was no friendly smile, no attempt at small talk, only the cold, suffocating weight of being cornered. He looked past the man, searching for the exit, but his way was blocked by the group. "Who are you?" Jacob asked, his voice harder now. The scarred man smiled faintly. "It doesn't matter who we are. What matters is that you come with us. Now." Sarah had been working her shift for hours, her feet aching beneath her, her mind spinning with the quiet hum of hotel life. She had grown used to the rhythms of this place, the ebb and flow of guests, the polite requests, the silent judgments. But tonight, something was different as she walked through the lobby. The tension in the air seemed to prick at her skin. She glanced up from her cleaning duties, noting the 5 men standing near Jacob. They weren't talking, weren't laughing like the usual guests. Instead, their eyes were locked on him, and their movements were deliberate, calculated. Sarah's instincts sharpened. This wasn't a social encounter. This was something else. She moved quietly through the crowd, her steps light, careful. She had seen this type of behavior before, the men who wanted something more than a drink or a handshake. She continued to watch from a distance. As Jacob's hand moved to his side, almost imperceptibly, like he was preparing for something he didn't yet understand. Without warning, the scarred man reached for Jacob's arm. "Come with us." Jacob's body stiffened. He was no stranger to confrontations, but this felt different. It wasn't just intimidation. It was a threat in an instant. Jacob's mind raced through his options: call security, fight back, run. But there was no clear way out. Then, through the tense silence, Sarah's voice rang out from across the room. "Hey!" Everyone froze, the moment suspended. Jacob's eyes widened as he saw Sarah approach the group, moving through the space with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen to end too many battles to be intimidated. The scarred man turned toward her. "This doesn't concern you." Sarah didn't flinch. She stepped closer, eyes locked on the men. "I think it does." For a moment, the tension snapped, like the sudden release of a string pulled too tight. The men didn't move. Sarah's presence held them at bay, but her calm demeanor was what truly threw them off balance. The largest man took a step forward. "You need to stay out of this." But Sarah was already moving. Her posture shifted from passive observer to active protector. She sidestepped the man and, with a single fluid motion, grabbed a nearby silver tray from a passing waiter and positioned herself between Jacob and the group. The tray, normally used for drinks and hors d'oeuvres, became a weapon, a shield held with the precision of someone who had learned the art of self-defense. The men looked at her with a mix of confusion and irritation. They weren't used to being challenged by someone like her, someone invisible to the wealthy, someone who served but was never seen. But Sarah wasn't just any maid. She had a past that no one in this room could understand. Skills honed in places far darker than this hotel lobby. She didn't have the strength of 10 men, but she had the strategic mind of someone who knew exactly what to do in situations like this. The scarred man lunged. But Sarah was faster. She spun to the side, using his momentum against him, and with a well-placed twist, sent him stumbling into one of the other men. Jacob's heart raced as the rest of the group hesitated, momentarily unsure of what to do. The chaos of the moment shifted, and Sarah's calm became their uncertainty. With a swift, controlled move, Sarah positioned herself between Jacob and the remaining men. "You don't want this fight," she said firmly, eyes steely. "Leave now, or I'll make you." It was quiet. The silence was thick with tension, but something had shifted. The men, realizing they had underestimated this woman, took a step back. After a long pause, the scarred man sneered. "This isn't over." And with that, the group turned, disappearing into the shadows of the hotel. Sarah stayed still for a moment, breathing deeply, allowing the adrenaline to fade. Then, she turned to Jacob, her face softening. "You all right?" she asked quietly. Jacob, his pulse still racing, nodded slowly. I don't know what to say." Sarah gave a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to say anything." Jacob didn't realize the danger until it was almost too late. The 5 men had surrounded him now, their stance aggressive and threatening. The confidence that had once filled his every step seemed to evaporate under the cold weight of their gaze. Every time he moved, they closed in. Every word he spoke, they countered with a harsh response. The tension in the air was palpable. People continued to dine, unaware of the threat unfolding just feet away. But Sarah felt the shift. She had always known when a situation turned wrong. The unease in Jacob's posture, the cold precision in the men's actions, the way they refused to blink or look away, it all screamed danger. She had seen this before, not in a hotel, but in places darker, less forgiving. She had been trained to recognize signals, the body language that betrayed people with bad intentions, the hands that hovered just too close to their waistband, the way the tallest of the men, with the scar running down his face, kept looking back at the exit like he was ready to move quickly. But what struck Sarah the most wasn't the aggression. It was the feeling of waiting in the air. They weren't just here for conversation. No, they had come with a clear purpose, and it didn't matter if they had to get what they wanted by force. Jacob was unaware of it all. He was focused on his wine glass, his attempts at conversation stuttering out as the men closed in. He didn't notice the distance between himself and the exit shrinking, or the way they subtly pushed him toward a corner of the room. They weren't just blocking his way out, they were hurting him. Sarah set down her cleaning supplies almost automatically. There was no hesitation in her movement, no doubt in her mind. It was instinct. She walked slowly toward the back of the room where the shadows hid her figure. She didn't need to make a scene. She had learned long ago that noise was a luxury she couldn't afford. The more attention you drew, the more exposed you became. She didn't need to act recklessly. She needed to act strategically. The largest of the group, the man with the scarred face, leaned closer to Jacob, his voice dropping low. "We've been watching you, Mr. Reynolds," he said, his words thick with menace. "It's time you heard what we have to say." Jacob's heart began to race. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I don't know who you are, or what you want, but I'm not interested." The man chuckled darkly. "You will be." Jacob felt trapped. There was nowhere to move. His back was pressed against the bar counter, and the men had strategically positioned themselves, blocking his exit. The restaurant, once filled with the quiet murmur of conversation and laughter, now seemed eerily distant. He could feel the weight of the silence in the room, and for the first time in a long while, he felt vulnerable. Sarah had reached the back hallway now, where the staff usually entered and exited. She paused briefly, her fingers tracing the edge of the door. She needed to act, but how? There were no obvious weapons at her disposal. No way to physically fight off the men without being seen, but she knew how to use the environment. Sarah's eyes flicked to the empty tray station nearby. It was the perfect height, just the right weight to be used as a shield if needed. But she wasn't going to attack. Not yet. Instead, she waited. She knew from experience that men like these were too proud to think someone could fight back. That someone like her could intervene without breaking a sweat. She had learned to act when it counted, and the moment was almost here. Jacob's voice wavered. "I said, I don't know who you are, who we are, doesn't matter," the scarred man said coldly. "What matters is who you're going to be once we're done with you." It was the way the man's hand slid inside his coat pocket. Slow. Deliberate, like he was reaching for a weapon that made Sarah act without thinking. She grabbed the tray from the station and slid behind a pillar, positioning herself in just the right angle to see everything. She had trained her body to move with instinct, silent, fluid, and fast. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Focused on the scarred man's hand, she saw the outline of the gun in his coat pocket. The moment he made the first move, she would strike, and strike hard. Victor, who had been watching from the corner, noticed the sudden stillness. He felt it too, that invisible pressure in the air. He didn't know who this woman was, but he could see it now. Sarah wasn't just an employee. She was something else entirely. The scarred man moved first, stepping closer to Jacob, and that's when Sarah made her move. It all happened in a flash. Sarah darted forward, swiftly, her body moving with an energy that shocked everyone around her. She used the tray to block the scarred man's movement, knocking his hand away from his jacket just as he reached for the gun. The men froze for a split second. Everything seemed to stop. Sarah's movements were smooth, calculated. She wasn't trying to hurt them. She was trying to disarm them. With a quick twist of her body, she sent the closest man stumbling backward, disorienting him. The men didn't know what to do. They had never been challenged like this by someone who didn't scream or run, but who acted with such calm precision. Jacob stood in stunned silence, watching as Sarah neutralized the situation with quick, calculated moves. No guns, no violence, just the quiet dominance of someone who had been trained for moments like this. And in that moment, he saw her for who she truly was, not just the maid, not just the woman who cleaned the floors, but the person who saved him. The scarred man stood up, his face red with anger and disbelief. "You'll regret this," he muttered. But Sarah stood tall. "I'm not done yet." The remaining men looked at each other, unsure whether to continue or retreat. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected her to fight back, to stand up to them with such quiet, overwhelming power, and as they realized they had lost control of the situation, They began to back away, their faces shifting from aggression to uncertainty. Jacob took a deep breath. His heart still racing. "Sarah," she turned to him, her eyes softening. "You're safe now, Mr. Reynolds." The tension in the air was still thick. Jacob stood in the lobby, his heart still racing as he processed everything that had just happened. The 5 men were gone, but his mind replayed their actions over and over again. How close had he come to losing control? How had Sarah, a maid in a hotel, turned the tables without ever breaking a sweat? As he stood there, the weight of the question bore down on him. He knew there had to be more to Sarah than he had ever imagined. But what could she have possibly been involved in to gain such remarkable skills? That night, after the hotel had quieted and the last guests had gone to their rooms, Jacob couldn't sleep. He sat up in his bed, the room dark except for the faint glow of city lights outside the window. His mind raced. He kept going back to Sarah's calm demeanor during the confrontation. The way she had faced down 5 men, without fear, without hesitation. There had been no panic, no flurry of action, just swift, precise movement. He had never been more confused. The next morning, Jacob couldn't let it go. He had to know. He had to understand how Sarah had done what she did, how someone who appeared to be so ordinary could hold such extraordinary strength. After a restless night, he decided to visit the staff areas. He didn't need anyone to recognize him. He just needed to talk to Sarah. When he found her, she was cleaning the hallway. The hotel's still bustling with early morning activity. Her movements were efficient, but there was an underlying grace to the way she worked, as if she knew exactly how to navigate the space without drawing attention. She didn't notice him at first, but Jacob stood there, watching her with new eyes. This woman, who had been invisible to him before, was now the person who had saved his life. He wanted to understand her, not just as a maid, but as a person. "Sarah," he called softly. She turned, her expression neutral, but her eyes locked with his. "Mr. Reynolds, what can I help you with?" "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice low. "Careful." She set the cleaning supplies down and gave him her full attention. "What is it?" Jacob hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Last night, you saved me. You stopped those men, without even thinking." "How?" For a long moment, Sarah didn't say anything. Her gaze softened, as if she was considering whether or not to share. "I've had a lot of training," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Self-defense, martial arts, hand-to-hand combat." Jacob's mind spun. "Martial arts?" She nodded slowly. "It's not something I talk about much. But I wasn't always a maid, Mr. Reynolds. I had a different life. One where survival meant more than just getting through a day. It meant acting when the time came." Jacob's breath caught. You were in security." Sarah didn't flinch. "Not just security. I was part of a protection team. We worked for people who needed guarding, people with power. But I didn't want that life anymore. It wasn't about protecting people who deserved it. It was about protecting people who could pay for it." Jacob was silent, digesting her words. "You left that life behind." She smiled faintly. "I did. I couldn't keep living that way. It wasn't the world I wanted to build, and it wasn't the world I wanted to raise a family in." "But you still kept the skills," Jacob said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded. "You never forget what you learn to survive." Jacob's eyes searched hers, trying to understand. "Then why this job? Why work here, when no one even knows who you really are?" Sarah's expression softened, and she looked away for a moment, as if reflecting on something deeper. "Because this job doesn't require me to hide. It allows me to blend in, to do the work without anyone asking for more. And most importantly, it gives me the chance to protect others in ways they'll never see coming." Jacob felt a lump form in his throat. He had never expected someone like Sarah to have such depth, such complexity. She wasn't just a maid, working to survive. She was someone who had lived a life full of risk, a life that had prepared her for exactly this moment. Later that afternoon, Sarah was tasked with cleaning a private suite on the top floor. Jacob, still processing the conversation, found himself unable to focus on anything but her. He knew it wasn't just the self-defense training that made Sarah special. It was her ability to see things others couldn't, to act when everyone else froze. She was always 2 steps ahead. And now, Jacob understood why. He walked up to the suite where Sarah was working. Knocking gently on the door before entering. Sarah was dusting the shelves, her movements smooth and precise. She didn't look up immediately, but when she did, her expression softened. "Mr. Reynolds, is everything all right?" "I've been thinking about what you said," Jacob admitted. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me before?" Sarah looked at him, her eyes calm. "I didn't need to tell you. You didn't need to know. I work here because I choose to, because it's who I want to be now. It's not about power or control. It's about finding peace in something simple." Jacob nodded slowly, understanding for the first time that the real power wasn't in money or influence. It was in the ability to walk through the world and not let it change who you were. Sarah had done that. She had learned to live with integrity, with strength, without needing to prove anything. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met," Jacob said quietly. "And I'm sorry I never saw it." Sarah smiled, a small, genuine smile. "It's all right. People don't always see what's right in front of them. It takes time to understand the value of real strength." As Jacob left the suite, he felt the weight of her words. He had spent his entire life believing power came from owning things, but now, standing in the hotel hallway, he understood. True power was about knowing who you were, even when the world tried to tell you differently. And Sarah, she had known all along. The city had not stopped moving. Cars rushed down snow-dusted streets. Pedestrians hustled in and out of buildings, their breath rising in clouds of vapor. The hum of the metropolis never faded, not even for a moment. But inside Valera, something had shifted. Victor Hale was gone. No one spoke his name anymore. His office door was locked, his desk cleared. The staff had moved on, not looking back. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt a sense of calm fill the air. No longer did she hear whispers in the halls. No longer was she the target of cruel words or dismissive gestures. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Sarah's presence had changed everything. She had reminded everyone what respect felt like and what it meant to stand tall, even in a world that often told you to shrink. Meanwhile, Jacob Reynolds sat in the quiet of his hotel suite, looking out at the city's skyline. The lights of the buildings reflected in the windows, creating a shimmering illusion of endless power. But Jacob felt a pang of emptiness. His wealth, his influence, they no longer held the same meaning. He had lived his life focused on gaining control, accumulating power, and building an empire. But in the wake of Sarah's intervention, in the wake of seeing her stand up to 5 men with nothing more than calm confidence, Jacob realized that he had been wrong. True strength didn't come from money. It came from something far deeper. The sound of a knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Sarah standing there, her expression as calm as ever. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. Jacob stepped aside. Of course. She entered the room, her presence as steady as the floor beneath their feet. Jacob had invited her to speak with him, to share whatever she had been holding back. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like there was more to her story, something deeper than the world had ever seen. "I've been thinking about what you said," Jacob began, his voice quiet. "You're right. I've spent my life building an empire, but I never thought about what it actually means to protect people, to help others, to be strong in a way that goes beyond wealth." Sarah nodded, sitting across from him. "It's a hard lesson to learn." Jacob hesitated, then asked, "But you left that life behind. The security, the protection work. Why? Why not stay in a world where you could have had anything?" Sarah's gaze softened. "Because I realized that protecting people doesn't mean controlling them. It means giving them the chance to stand on their own. I left because I didn't want to be part of a system that took from others. I wanted to find a way to protect, without exploiting." Jacob sat back, processing her words. Her strength was undeniable, not because of the physical skills she had, but because of the philosophy she lived by. One of service, not dominance. He felt a shift inside himself. He realized that his own life, his own achievements, had been built on the belief that power was about control. But now, with Sarah's influence, he was starting to understand that real power came from lifting others, not keeping them beneath you. As Jacob sat in the silence, Sarah looked at him, her voice quiet but firm. "You've learned the first lesson, Mr. Reynolds. The next step is what you do with it." He met her eyes, feeling a quiet strength within himself. "I don't know what to do yet. But I know I want to start. I want to help people for real. Not just with money, but with something more." Sarah smiled faintly. "Then you've already started." Later that day, Jacob called his board of directors. He explained that his focus was shifting. The company he had spent years building would still thrive, but it would no longer be just about the bottom line. It would be about making a difference in ways that went beyond profit. He also reached out to Amara, offering her a position as an advocate for workers' rights in the hospitality industry. She accepted, quietly but with gratitude, and then Jacob returned to the place that had started it all, Valera. He stood in front of the restaurant, looking at the glowing sign. He hadn't realized it until now, but this was where his journey had begun. The humility he had learned from Sarah, from Marcus's quiet justice, had led him here. The world, Jacob now knew, wasn't just built by the rich and powerful. It was built by the everyday people who did what they could, where they could, without ever asking for anything in return. And those were the people who deserved to be seen. If you're still watching, think about this. Real strength isn't about how much you control. It's about how much you give, how much you protect, without asking for recognition. Sarah didn't just save Jacob. She showed him the true meaning of power. Stay with us until the end, because the next step is one that'll change everything. The city lights outside Jacob's penthouse flickered like 1,000 tiny stars, their glow filling the room with warmth. Inside, Jacob stood at the window, his eyes tracing the skyline. But his thoughts were far from the tall buildings and vast wealth that had once defined his world. The lesson he had learned from Sarah, the maid with unseen strength, had changed everything. For years, he had built his empire by controlling and dominating, but now he saw the truth. Real power wasn't about control. It was about empowering others, about humbling yourself enough to see the strength in those you overlooked. He turned away from the window. Looking at the desk in front of him, cluttered with papers and contracts, he picked up the phone and dialed the first number on his speed dial. "Sarah, I need you to meet me. I've been thinking a lot, and I want to start making some changes." Later that day, Sarah met him in the same restaurant where everything had started. She sat across from him, her posture still quiet, but her gaze unwavering. "You called for me, Mr. Reynolds?" she asked softly. Jacob smiled. "No need for formalities. It's Jacob now." She nodded, but the slight smile on her face didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't used to this side of him, the side where he wasn't calling the shots. She was used to him in power. This side of Jacob, uncertain and open to change, was still unfamiliar to her. "I've been thinking," Jacob began, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "I've spent too many years building my wealth, thinking I had to control everything. But I see now that my power was built on the backs of others, the people who worked for me, who served me, people like you." Sarah's eyes softened. "You don't need to apologize, Mr. Reynolds." He shook his head. "No, I need to do more than apologize. I need to make this right." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I'm starting a foundation, a real one. One that's dedicated to uplifting those who have been overlooked, the workers, the underrepresented. You've taught me that real power isn't about money. It's about service. I want to build something that gives people the chance to thrive." Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching. "And what part do you want me to play?" Jacob's smile was full of genuine humility. "You're the one who showed me what true strength is. I want you to lead it. I want you to run the foundation. Not as a figurehead, but as someone who's been there, who understands what it means to give." The foundation launched a few weeks later. The Sarah Foundation for Empowerment, named not after Jacob but after the woman who had shown him the true meaning of power. The focus was clear, lifting up those who had been overlooked. Sarah had never wanted recognition, but Jacob insisted. He knew that in order for the world to truly change, they needed to see her for who she was, a leader, a protector, and a woman whose quiet strength had saved more than just his life. The foundation began working with organizations to provide free self-defense training for women, leadership programs for underprivileged youth, and safe shelters for those in need. The staff at Valera was among the first to join, participating in diversity and inclusion workshops. Jacob didn't just make donations. He worked alongside Sarah, volunteering his time, attending meetings, and sharing his own story. The press called it a turnaround, but it wasn't just about the media. It was about real change. Months passed, and Jacob's world slowly shifted. No longer did he attend charity galas for the sake of his ego. Now, he attended community meetings. Meeting people who weren't trying to impress him, they were simply trying to survive. One evening, after a meeting with a group of community organizers, Jacob found Sarah in the lobby, watching the city from the window. He stood beside her, feeling the same weight of understanding he had first felt when he realized what she was capable of. "You're doing more than I ever expected," he said quietly. She smiled softly. "We're doing this together." Jacob looked at her, his voice earnest. "No, you did this. You're the one who taught me what it means to serve." Sarah glanced at him, a small but knowing smile playing on her lips. "And you listened." That night, as Sarah left the hotel for the last time, she looked back at the lights, the windows that now reflected a world of change. Jacob had kept his word, but more than that, he had learned the lesson she had tried to teach him all along, that power didn't come from wealth, and strength didn't come from control. It came from listening, it came from acting when it mattered, and it came from humility, a humility that Jacob had learned, not through books or speeches, but through a maid who had quietly saved his life. As she walked out into the cool night, Sarah smiled to herself. She had never asked for much, but she had been given more than she had ever dreamed, and with it, the ability to help others rise. The city would never be the same, and neither would she. In a world where strength is often measured in dollars and power, Sarah showed us what real strength looks like. It's quiet, it's humble, and it's always ready to protect. Jacob Reynolds learned what true power was not through wealth, but through the courage to lift others. If this story moved you, share it, because real strength isn't about who you can control, it's about how many you can protect. And maybe, just maybe, we all need a reminder of what that looks like.